All right. Well, hello everyone. Chairman, welcome to another day of town, another adventure where we're going to dive into a topic that I think we've actually talked about a couple of times on here, and it has to do with amp cab simps. So we were across a bridge, and we were thrown this article to look at on top amp cabs and sims of 2023. So we'll go through that. But I just want to say, hey guys doing good?
I'm doing well. Yes, I think it's going to be a good day in tone today, Brian.
Yes, good. Well, I'm excited to talk over this. I've already looked at the lists, and I'm liking what I'm seeing. So we'll dive right into it. Before we do, I just want to say, if you guys like the podcast, if you're listening, if you're watching, please go leave us a review. We like to see what you guys are thinking about the podcast. If you're liking it, you can even say, "Man, I love it when Grant wears that hat, that black hat, or anything."
Never seen me without it.
Without it, yeah.
When Brian's got his hair exposed. This is a
Yes.
rare event where Brian is showing his full mane, and he has beautiful hair. You wouldn't know it underneath that cap, but he's got very thick hair, a beautiful hairline. So just for all you listeners out there, I can describe to you, and if if Pantene Pro V, if you're listening, you want to do a shampoo sponsorship, I think we're all game for that.
Let's do it.
Grant can condition his beard.
Yes.
And
every day,
and I can, or Herbal Essence. I don't know if people remember those Herbal Essence commercials
I do.
from the 90s. Whew. Those were very stimulating, if you catch my drift.
There's actually talk on the dark web lasting about Brian's hair. I monitor the dark web quite often, and there's talk on the dark web.
It's where you hire all your hitmen, huh?
Is this his real color? And the people don't know. The people are talking, but they want an answer. I don't know if we're going to get it today, but thought I'd leave it there for the hair color topic, Brian, and throw it back to you.
We'll see.
It's hashtag does the carpet match the drapes? That's right.
We'll to be continue that conversation. But
tune into his OnlyFans.
It's Omilion after dark. All right, well let's jump on into this. We'll go through these real quick, and then we'll just chat about it after. So going down the list.
Just say real quick though, Brian, this is probably, we've had some bad lists here. I would actually say this is probably one of the best lists that have come from any of the guitar magazines that we've reviewed in the past year. So this is a stronger list, I think, than normal. Just want to say that moving into it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can obviously, from our advertisement on the side, that Pottery Barn is having a sale. That has nothing to do with this podcast, but I just got to bring that up because my wife is like, I really want something from Pottery Barn. I'm like, oh, great. It's a pillowcase. How much? She's like, it's $8,000. I'm like, Jesus, no, that's not going to happen.
Now 50% off.
It's only $4,000. What a deal. What a deal. Just like that, not a clone from JHS. What a deal. But we'll go down this list real quick. So if you're listening, just envision these are a lot of the top pedals I put on boards, I see on boards. I literally have like four of them right in front of my face on my rack. But the number one is going to be the Line 6 HX Stomp, coming in at $699, which is a great pedal. The Strymon Iridium, $395. The Neural DSP Quad Cortex, $1699. I think we're all a little familiar with that guy.
Yeah, and recent price drop, so it's a little more affordable than it once was.
Recent price drop, the editor, all of it. It's amazing. The IK Multimedia Tonex pedal. We did a podcast on this a while ago where we talked over it, but none of us had really had the opportunity. And I will say, ever since that podcast, I have used it multiple times, and it's awesome. It's an amazing pedal. Number 5. Number 5 is the UA Audio Dream 65. Then we got number 6 is, and this is one I've actually never used. I've seen it, but I've never used it. It's a Black Star Department 10 Amped 1 pedal.
I'm wondering what's Department 9. Like what?
Yeah,
we don't talk about Department 9.
It's like took 10 it's like a version. The next one is the Wallace Audio Mako Series ACS1. which is another great one. The Orange Terrace Stamp. I've actually never heard of that one. Maybe it's a new one.
Lowest cost on our list today.
It is $199. $199. And then the 2 notes Revolt Analog Amp Sim. I am familiar with this one. I've never put it on a board because it is quite large. It's in the HX Stomp realm. But there's one actually that they don't have in this little summary, and it's going to be the TC Electronic. Yeah, the 10th one is the TC Electronic Amp Work with a X, not a K. Works. Gems 45. So it's I think it's their newer one that they came out with, which is off of a Marshall. So,
right. So it's probably like a JTM 45 type sound, not referring to Jim's gun collection where he's got his Colt 45. It sounds just like his Colt 45.
Maybe it's not even an amp sim.
It's actually just like a jerky. When you said Jim's guns, I thought Jim's jerky, like beef jerky. It's a meat switch. Like it just makes somebody know. That's a name right there. But yeah, so from that list, guys, what do you think? I mean, there are some good ones on there.
I'm a fan of a lot of these companies. I mean, I'm the same as you, Brian. I haven't tried the Amped one. I haven't put it on a board. Haven't tried it. I'm a little curious. I also haven't tried the orange one. The experience I've had with anything, and this is by no means conclusive, but I love orange tube amps. I haven't had the best experience with anything they do on, practice, low wattage, pedalboard friendly type stuff. But I would be curious to try it because they obviously know what they're doing on the tube amp side of things. Other than that, I haven't tried the Jims 45, the jerky, the gun, or the amp sim. So there's 3 on that list I haven't tried. Everything else I'm relatively familiar with. I'm a big fan of 2 notes as well. But overall, I think the list, like Mason said, we've had some pretty rough lists in the past. This is not a rough list. Yeah. I would give this list 3.5 beef jerkies out of 5 for sure.
So a C.
That.
It's a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, let's go C+. No,
Okay.
I'd probably give it a B. I'd up my when you put it like that, Mason.
8 out of 10. So 4 pieces of jerky.
Yeah, let's go 4.
Okay,
it's a good list.
Yeah. I think that I can understand the tempering of the list. Like obviously, like the quad cortex. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that as far as amp sounds, nothing is as good as the quad cortex as far as the sounds of the amps. I've tried all these. They all have their redeeming qualities. Some of them can get, can produce really great effects that I think that maybe the Neural doesn't have as good of versions of. And then of course there's stuff that's not really like in the same class as a quad cortex, like like obviously the ACS1 doesn't do any sort of additional effects other than just the amps itself, but the price point reflects that, as does the Strymon Iridium. So I really feel like there's kind of different tiers that exist within here. So sort of like the UA Dream, the ACS1, the Iridium, those are kind of, I think, as competitors, whereas like the HX Stomp, the Quad Cortex, the Tonex are kind of more similar in terms of like kind of the things that they do. They produce multiple amps. You can add some level of effects to these. But yeah, I think it's a really great list, and I appreciate that they did put on some, like the Revolt is an analog pedal, and then it's using 2 notes, signature simulations for the power amp and the cabinet, and miking IRs and all that stuff that you can add on to the output of that. I was surprised though, and I don't know when this list came out, but Friedman also came out with something that's very similar to the Revolt, where it's using a 12AX7 and then it's adding on impulse responses on the output. So you could, and it also had an effects loop, which I think this has. So that's another interesting choice that's not reflected on here, but could be another cool, at least partially analog circuit where you do still have the benefits of a full analog tube preamp section, and then you're running into like a digital cab sim and impulse response section to follow. So I do like this list. I feel like it looks somewhat there is some symmetry between what we see out in the real world and what's on this list, where sometimes they're very disassociated and and very esoteric. So I appreciate this list, and let's maybe dive into some of these picks.
Let's do it. Yeah, I want to say that the list came out in September 11th, 2023. So it wasn't too long ago. It was,
no,
2 months.
2 months ago. Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to mention. I do want to mention. We'll obviously talk about it too. Is there's only a few of these units that have XLR outs on the back. And then there's one that has balance outs, 1/4 inch, but we'll talk over that. Which brings me to my first point is the HX Stomp. So if you're listening, familiar with it, the HX Stomp, there's a couple different versions of the Line 6 stuff. So you have like the HX Effects, the HX Stomp, the HX Stomp XL, the new, I think it's called the One, but that's not really like, but it's not really
it's like an M5, right?
Yeah, I don't think I don't think it's considered an amp cab. I could be wrong.
I think it does. I could be wrong. I think it just does the effects. Like you have 2 effects preset, or I think you can add like a hot switch to it or something like that if you wanted to make like another preset change or a bank up, bank down, or a tap tempo. But to me, for all intents and purposes, it looks like it's a replacement of like what the M5 did.
Got it, which is cool. The M5 is great. It's a great pedal. But yeah, coming in at number 1 is the HX Stomp with 5 stars.
Yeah,
they gave it the full 4.5, and it's a great pedal. I had this one. I used this one for my amp and cab stuff. It was crazy. This was the first one I used where I actually bought like IRs to load in, and I had no idea what I was like really doing, because I've always used the Iridium or the ACS1, but this one you could load in IRs, which was really cool, and you could.
Is that back when you used to call them ERs?
Yeah, ERs. You got those ERs. What ERs? No. But the cool thing about this one is it has a lot of connectivity options. Has stereo input, stereo output, stereo effects loop, MIDI, headphone out, foot switches on it, and you can. There's companies I've been seeing that you can buy external switches to do like extra foot switches, or you can connect a MIDI control to it. So there's a lot of really cool options. You can do your path, your signal chain. You can use, I literally built a board around this for someone where he did analog pedals partially into it to hit the front end. And then he did the effects loop, hit more analog wet effects, and then went back in and used the amp and cab stuff. So like, it's a really cool pedal. It has balanced line outs, which I used when I had it. So I had TRS 1/4 inch to XLR. And I could just go in straight into a system. You'll see people that will use like direct boxes, which I'm curious from you guys on that one, if you would use a direct box with this one.
Depends on how far you had to go to hit the mixer. You know, I think if you were, I think that the output impedance to this is 500 ohms, which I think is pretty standard for like that sort of stuff. But if you were going a real long way, like, I don't know, a few hundred feet, I don't think you'd risk much by doing it. But if you're relatively close, I don't think it would matter. You could always do a little audio test.
For sure.
And it is phantom power protected as well, which is good.
Yeah.
So if someone does send phantom, it's not going to pop the pedal.
Yeah, that's good.
But I remember when I first got the HX, I got it for effects only, not even considering about amp and cab sim. And it was when it first came out, and I may still have the same firmware from when it first came out. Its firmware is old on mine.
Vintage.
And then I remember trying the amp and cab sim and just being blown away. Like, for something I wasn't expecting to use it for. And then I found the kind of matchless Spitfire, I think, I can't remember what they call it on the HX Stomp, but the matchless sounds on there, and compared it with my real matchless through, monitors and everything. I was like, they actually did a really good job as a stock preset. No aftermarket IRs, no anything. I was very impressed. And so I think for a pedal, at least from when I first got it, that I was just like, yeah, it's line 6. I don't expect much from them as far as amp and cab sim. I kind of know what I'm going to get as far as effects, and they're pretty good. I like their effects. They're not my absolute favorite, but they do a solid, consistent job. Mm-hmm. And then to hear the amp and cab sim and have it just blow me away, I was very impressed by it. And so I think, I mean, I don't know if I would personally put it in number 1, but I would definitely have the HX Stomp in my top 3 as far as tone for dollars. This thing it's a really good unit. They've done such a good job on it, and it's reliable too. I've had so many M5s break, but the Line 6 is built very well, very reliable, very sturdy. So I'm very impressed with the unit overall. I think it's a well-earned pick for the top 3.
Yeah, I mean, what's impressive to me about this too is like you'll see people that will just put it on the board with like timelines and big skies and those kind of things, but it's the people that utilize this like on a pedal train nano with an expression pedal, and like that's it, and they're like throwing in their mono creators tick bag that hooks on the front of their gig bag, and they're to a gig or they're on a plane or something. It's just how small this thing can be and how powerful it is. And it's amazing. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, when I got this pedal, I loved I love the sounds and everything. I was most impressed is because I just had one is the USB on the back when you connected it to the computer, how it worked with the editor, how it all updated in real time. Like that for me was probably the most impressive, like newer on the kid on the block type of thing, just because I think when this came out, there wasn't many that was doing that in real time. And I'm sure the Helix and stuff I think did it too, but I never had a Helix. So like I wasn't as, into what those were doing. So when this came out, I was like, this sucker is powerful. So yeah, I think it's a great choice. Before we continue, I want to throw to one of you guys to do a quick ad and we'll jump back into this.
Yes, thank you, Brian. And we have a couple of great sponsors that make the podcast possible every single week. And so we appreciate you being patient and listening to some of the news from our sponsors, but also giving you a great opportunity to save a little dough and get some good products while you're at it. The first of which are our friends over at the Guitar Sanctuary. And as we say every week, Brian loves it so much at the Guitar Sanctuary, he's actually there right now. And if you want to get some of the most premier gear in the world, all the finest boutique gear, you can go over to Guitar Sanctuary, purchase it there, and then give it all to Brian to assemble it for you in a beautifully laid out and assembled pedal board. Head over to theguitarsanctuary.com. You can see all their offerings they sell online, or you can go in person in McKinney, Texas, and purchase those items yourself. Also, our friends over at Neural DSP, also making the list today of best amp in a box, amp sim, pedals, and multi-effects. Our friends over at Neural DSP are offering a special coupon code to listeners where they can get 30% off any plugins on their website, with exception to their newest release, the Mateus Asado plugin, which absolutely looks amazing. I feel like I'm just willing to pay full price for it because it's vetted by one of the very best guitar players in the world at the moment, Mateus Asado. Great clean tones, great lead tones, comes with a couple of pedals included in that package. Really, really great tones. But if you want to get 30% off any of the other amazing Neural DSP stuff, use the coupon code Chairmen at checkout. Get 30% off. Go to neuraldsp.com and again, use the coupon code Chairman, get 30% off. And lastly, I want to talk about our friends over at the Sweetwater Gear Exchange. Sweetwater Gear Exchange is essentially a used platform where you can buy and sell used gear with your fellow musician peers. And it is a great way to unload gear. It is a great way to buy gear. And the coolest thing about it, which I really love as a seller, is if you sell on the Gear Exchange and you decide to put your earnings on a gift card from Sweetwater, you don't pay any seller's fees. So this would give you potentially 12 to 15% more money than you would ordinarily get by the time you subtracted all the fees and all those things that you would normally associate with selling on any of those other platforms. I highly recommend people check out Sweetwater's Gear Exchange. Go to sweetwater.com/used. Back to you, Brian.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I love it so much that I'm literally here right now. So
yep, his sleeping bag is over there in the corner. He sleeps there, because you have to live tone You can't just talk about it. Yep.
Live, laugh, tone, as they say, right?
Or I always wonder, is it
all right,
live?
come back on
Are
it.
they saying live or live?
Yeah, it almost feels like they would say live.
Live laugh tone.
Live laughing tone. Coming in at number 2, which is another 5-star and a pretty well-known one, is the Strymon Iridium. Great pedal. 500 milliamps. I mean, we know all about this pedal. Headphone jack. That's the cool thing about this one, is that it has like an 1/8 inch jack. You'll see some of them will do like the 1/4 inch jack. Some of them will do no jacks. But this is around one of my favorite pedals on the amp cab market. I have one right here too. But what do you guys think?
It's a solid pedal, you know? I think Iridium does a really good job. It was, I don't know if you guys would agree or not, but I would say it's one of the earlier amp and cab sims that kind of took the market by storm a little bit. Like it was one of the ones that really pushed everything forward, in my opinion, as far as amp and cab sim. Showed what could be done in a small format with MIDI. And it's not like it's that old, but I think it was a really good step forward for this product. So yeah, Iridium I think is incredible. It would not be my number one pick. I think there are amp and cab sims out there that do a better job of getting closer to the real sound of the amp, whatever that is. I know that's very subjective. Before you send in some emails, but I would say it's probably the one I struggle to really connect with it as a piece of gear. It wouldn't be the one I pick off the shelf if I need an amp and cab sim, but I have plenty of customers that it is their absolute go-to. They've tried all the ones we're talking about, and Iridium is their choice. And so I think it's honestly probably more preference on this one than it is matter of fact.
I think for its time, though, it was kind of, you know, yeah. it was a leader, I think, in the pack. I mean, if you think of, you know, of all the stuff on this list, I think it's the longest lived, like as far as, you know, from when it came out. And I think they did a really good job of sort of trying to consolidate, you know, 3 of the most common amp types, you know, common speaker types. And for many people, whether you're doing praise and worship or you're doing live performances in ampless sort of environments, this was a pretty reliable and solid choice. And I think, you know, there wasn't really much that competed with it until the ACS-1 came out.
Yeah.
And so I can appreciate what it does. I can appreciate the compact nature. I think that, you know, I think UA, maybe not as far as the interface is concerned, because I think that the drawback of the UA is that you'd have to have 3 separate units to sort of be able to replicate what the Iridium does. But I think in terms of the sound, the UA stuff is closer to the representative amplifiers comparatively to the Iridium, but they also have whatever it is, like a 5 or 8 year, you know, time span of development, and they've also specialized in those plugins for many years, you know, in refining them to sort of match up closely to the amps. So, you know, it's understandable that the Dream would be maybe more advanced than the Iridium would be. And I'm sure that we're going to probably see some sort of revision to this in the near future from Strymon, because, you know, they're wanting to compete with what's out there now. So I predict that at some point in the near future, we're going to be seeing a revision of the Iridium that sort of keeps up with, you know, the way that things have kind of evolved since its original release.
Yeah, I've been saying this. I've been telling people in the store, I expect 2 things, one of 2 things to happen. I expect them to come out with a Cloudburst size Iridium, so the smaller form factor, or a Volante sized XLR outs, kind of like they could go 2 different ways, but that's the larger version you could do different, like basically have like double of all the switches, so you could have 2 different amp types, 2 different cab types. Like there's a bunch of different ways that Strymon can go, because Strymon is Strymon. They're going to drop something out of the blue and everyone's like, I didn't know I needed that. And then you get it. It's amazing. But I would say, you know, from this list, It's a great list, and we don't have to rehash every single 1 through 10 of every single one of these pedals that we just talked about. The list is on guitarplayer.com/gear/best pedal amps. So if you really want to check it out, feel free to go there. We'll have a link for it. But I think from here, it'd be cool to get your guys' insight on like picking these amp cap pedals, because there's so many out there. There's analog bass, there's these digital bass, there's Iridium. Like there's a lot of different versions to buying these pedals that I think sometimes it just gets that it just keeps getting like kind of like lost in what's out there and what people should get. It's like option galore. So I'd be interested in hearing from you guys, like what you look for in an amp cap pedal in order to pick. Sorry, I'm trying to remember my initial thought, but basically, what are your go-to things you look at when picking out an amp cap pedal?
Yeah, you want to start with that, Grant?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think it's honestly kind of like a real amp these days, as in if there's a new amp on the market, I personally, unless I know the company very well and know what they, put out, I am not going to buy it blindly. I need to actually try it out for myself and see how it feels and how it sounds. So I feel like the biggest thing is if you can go to a local store, the Guitar Sanctuary or whatever is close to you, and actually try it out for yourself. I think that is a really good approach to do with these things, because everyone, like everything else when people are trying to sell stuff, on paper, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be the best thing that you've ever seen, according to the company trying to sell it. But I think like the difference between the Iridium and the ACS1, when they both first came out, there's no way you could really choose on that. I mean, there's a few specs the ACS1 has that the Iridium doesn't. Strymon has the brand name behind it, maybe a bit more so than Walrus, as far as, in my opinion. And so it'd be on paper really hard to choose. But if I was to choose on paper, I'd pick Iridium. If I was to choose in reality after trying them, I would pick the ACS1 for my personal preference. So I feel like that's one of the biggest things. The other thing is obviously hardware. And if you need XLR outputs, that cuts the list in half right away. And if that's an absolute necessity, then that's going to dictate your choice. The headphone out thing for me is a non-starter, although I think it's really important to chat about. I would not personally use it because I usually would just be plugging into a sound system or my DAW. But I also think something to bring up that we haven't touched on yet is oftentimes the Iridium, in my opinion, being a key example of this. Oftentimes, the amp and cap sim is going to sound better before your modulation and wet effects. So you go overdrives, gain, all that. Then you can plug into your amp and cap sim. Then you can go into your modulation and wet, and then out to your system. At that point, if you plug into the headphone out, you're only going to be hearing your gain pedals. And, depending on what you're doing, that's going to be quite frustrating. So the headphone out, if you're prioritizing sound or tone, which you always should, then the headphone out is going to be kind of rendered useless anyways. So there's a little bit to think about there, but I really think try it out in person if you can, and then secondary to that, I would definitely be looking at hardware. And as far as my last point, and then I'll pass to you, Mason. As far as the big complaint against the UA stuff, the Dream, and their whole interface is they basically, people are saying, I don't have all that flexibility. I can't have 4 or 5 amps. I don't know about you guys, but I would much, much rather have one Fender style amp that sounds incredible, even if we're talking real tube amps, than 5 different amps that sound like, yeah, those are 80% there, 85% there. That last 5 to 10%, it means the world when you're playing guitar. And I feel like overall tone and how the amp and cab sim sounds far outweighs any interface, any whatever it is, even hardware for me, because when I plug in, I want that thing to sound and feel great, and I want it to inspire me to keep playing. And that 5% difference for me, it's just the difference between me playing another 10, 15 minutes or putting it down. And so for me, I think that the UA stuff, is really great, even though it's not as feature packed as maybe some of the other stuff we might see.
Yeah. I think that Grant's onto something. I think that the main reason why I would say that is if you think of the context of most people gigging, typically you're not bringing multiple amps to a gig, even if you are using tube amps. So it wouldn't be typical that somebody would bring a Marshall, a Vox, and a Fender to a gig, and that they would be selecting between 3 amps with their rig.
Yeah.
And even though an Iridium allows you to do that, it's not something that typically you would do if you were to say extrapolate those 3 sounds and then use them in the real world. It's more typical you'd bring a deluxe reverb, or you'd backline a Hot Rod DeVille or Hot Rod Deluxe or whatever it is, and then you would be using your rig in front of that. So if you're kind of trying to substitute 1-to-1 what would happen on a gig, using something like an individual pedal model like a UA Dream or a Ruby or a Woodrow or whatever it is, these are probably more of a more similar to how you might be using a real tube amp in a gig. You wouldn't have all 3 of them on stage with you unless you're like a rock star,
Yeah.
So I would say that in that sense, I think, if you're just talking about representing what you would normally use, I think something like that is fine. It's really awesome though, if you need the capability of being able to have a lot of different amps and you want to profile your own amps. Of course, you can't really do that with, the universal audio stuff. You have to kind of use, with the framework that they've set up. But again, and that's why I think the Quad Cortex is really pretty amazing, because not only do you have their whole entire suite of amplifiers, but you can also take your favorite amplifiers and profile them, which we've done. And if you go to the Vertex Effects Neural Cloud, you can download some of my amps for free. And I've profiled the Bandmaster that I have, which is a 1965 Bandmaster. I've added my Klon up there. I've added in a King of Tone with several different settings in each channels. These are just cool things you can't do on those other things. But I also don't think that they're comparable pedals. They're not really competitors with each other. What the Neural Quad Cortex does is really pretty dissimilar from the UA Dream. But if I'm just thinking about compact, pedalboard friendly, putting it on and getting a really nice sound out of it, I definitely think that the UA stuff is, for the compact nature, even though it's less feature laden, as Grant pointed out, I would rather go with one of those devices and put a bunch of effects in front of it, or some before and some after it, than get something that can do 3 different sounds and different cabinets and all that stuff. Because in reality, that's just not how the gig would go. I do think the headphone jack thing is an issue. I mean, I think that the obvious workaround that as these develop more, that the easiest solution would be to create some sort of effects loop, because then that way you can still have effects that occur after, let's say, the circuitry of the amplifier, but you would still have them being caught by the stereo headphone jack, and so that's a bummer. Again, I think the only thing that I've recommended to people, if they do use stuff like this and they want to use processing gear afterwards, is to get something like a Rolls mini mixer or something like that, where you basically just put the outputs out of your final effect, whether it be a delay or a reverb, put those into the mixer, and then the mixer has its own stereo output, and then you can also utilize the headphone output from there, and you have your own level control and stuff like that. But it is another thing to add, and maybe not that convenient, but that is a workaround if you do want to have the option to do it. And also the Rolls mini mixer, the 1/4-inch version, has a really nice output buffer too. So like if you were planning to use it, it wouldn't be like it would be a compromise. I'd say the buffer in that mini mixer is better than most pedals on the market, including the Strymons and all that stuff. So just a heads up on that.
Yeah. Sorry, guys, my headphones cut out for a second. But yeah, no, I agree. I wanted to mention with these types of pedals, don't, as you guys have already kind of mentioned, that some of these have more features than others. Don't always get caught up on the features if you're listening, because as Mason already said, like at the gig, and I've asked multiple sound people before, and the one thing that they hate is people switching amp, on their Iridium or something, them switching between preset 1 and preset 2, and it being a completely different amp, a completely different cabinet, and it like completely changes like how they EQ'd that channel. So sometimes it puts so much more work on the front of house guy. And I'm not a front of house engineer, but I've asked people like, hey, so if I switch between this other amp, what are you doing? Oh, well, completely changes how I had EQ'd your channel. So those are some things to think about. I will say before we hit our ad is the Edge. He is using some UA pedals, U2 UA. The Woodrow, and I think the Dream for those,
or the Ruby. He was using
Sphere.
the Ruby.
I don't know where it is. It's that big Sphere.
Is it
the Ruby?
Vegas?
I can't remember.
Yeah,
that big Vegas thing. And someone was like, "Can you believe that he's using?" And they're like, "Well, he doesn't have any stage volume." I'm like, but no. You watch the Premiere guitar video. Underneath the stage is all 15 of his amps that he's running and everything typically for his gigs. So it's really cool to see even someone like him is using these types of pedals because they sound really great. And people do harp on the no headphone, the no MIDI, and those kind of things. And I'm like, man, stop thinking about all the features. Set your amp really well, get it really good how you want it, and like don't mess with it. Like that's how I always do it. But yeah, no, I'm loving this conversation. Let's throw to our second set of sponsors just so we can share some love and get you guys some good discounts. So I'll throw it to you, Grant.
Cool. Thanks, Brian. So guys, I want to tell you about our first sponsor, which is Mono Creators. You can find them at monocreators.com. Also just known as Mono, just to confuse you a little bit. These guys do the best gig bags, like soft bags, double guitar bags, some incredible angled pedal boards with soft bags as well, and recently power supplies and some extra accessories. So they do some incredible gear, very well manufactured as well, and it's just built to last. The soft bags I have from Mono, I've had for probably 10 years plus, and they're still going strong. So it's an investment into protecting your gear in a kind of transportable way. So definitely check out Mono Creators. You can find them, like I said, at monocreators.com and use the code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, to get 10% off your order, which is awesome. I also want to tell you about BTPA, or Bestronics. This is where we go, Brian, myself, Mason, for any plugs, cable, additional accessories. I always email Brad when I have something that's kind of a little left of center or not as common, like D-socket USB-A to B jacks. I just email Brad. He's like, yep, got them in stock, and he ships them out the door. So they have a lot of different stuff for your pedal board, accessories, and patching needs. So check them out, btpa.com. Use the code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, and you will also get 10% off. 2 codes in a row. This is going well. Let's go for number 3, Stringjoy. This is the Netflix of strings. You can set up subscriptions at your cadence to get strings sent to you automatically in a time or amount that you need. You can also do one-off purchases. So they do some incredible strings, different material types, obviously gauges and instruments, coated or uncoated. Stringjoy has you covered. In America, I think they're out of Nashville, and so you're going to get them quickly. And so check out stringjoy.com. And the code for this one, guys, I might need your help on this one. I believe
it's easy. Boards, BOARDS, 10% off.
That's it. So 3 codes in a row. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. I think how it works is if you do 3 codes at 10% each, you just saved 30%. So
look at that.
I just think it's a good day. It's a good day to be a guitar player. Let's get back to the episode here as we finish up. I'll throw it to you, Brian.
For sure. Thank you. Yeah, I think looking over the list, and I was going to mention it to you guys, what do you guys see advantages? Because there's some of these on there that are more the Black Star. It's the type is a solid state. Let's just put it at that. And then the Revolt, I can't remember the name, I was blanking. The 2 Notes Revolt is a tube preamp. So when people see those types of things, me or someone else or anyone, whoever it is, could see that and be like, oh, well, what's the benefits of having this tube preamp cab sim DI from Two Notes over buying, say the ACS1 or something? So, curious from you guys, do you see benefits to having an amp and cab pedal that is a tube based? Like, what are there cons? Like, do you have to worry about it being like a tube amp? Because like, I think for a lot of people is they use these amp cabs and pedals because they want the reliability. So does the reliability go out the window when they have a tube based preamp or a tube based amp cab pedal? Like, does that reliability go away? Should you be worried about having to have tubes? Because last thing I want to do is have to put tubes in my backpack and bring it with me.
Mason, I'll let you start this one.
I think it probably comes down to more of the design than anything to do with the tube itself. And most of these are not running at super high voltages, even, excuse me, even if it's, let's say 18 volts or 24 volts, which I don't think this is on the input, or even if it's converting it to a higher voltage internally. It's not the same as probably the voltage that you would see a 12AX7 at in most ordinary tube amplifiers. So I would say that there's probably less wear and tear in the tube, or on the tube in the case of something like a Revolt. So that would certainly extend the life of the tube. But I don't think I have any real reservations about it. I think that it's always nice to have the feeling of a tube under your fingers, and I know that there's digital processes to try to emulate what that's doing. But I also know people that try to put in, pedals before their amp simulation to kind of make it feel a little bit more like a tube. So I don't have anything, I guess, wrong with the Revolt or anything that to me seems like it's problematic. It just seems like it didn't take off the same way that a lot of these other ones did, despite its price being fairly competitive with like the Universal Audio and the ACS1. So, it's interesting to me just from a marketplace standpoint, no commentary on how this sounds relative to the other ones, that it doesn't seem like the value of the tube, at least to the market, is overemphasized, depending or comparatively to the other ones that are just strictly digital emulating amplifier sounds, whether it be the Dream, the ACS1, or the Iridium. I just don't see a lot of the Revolts on pedal boards. I think the idea behind the Revolt's great. It's kind of like a multi-channel amp that you have right there. It'll be interesting to see how another pedal in the Friedman version, which does have a 12AX7 and is using sort of similar technology where they have the IRs on the output, how well that does, or whether it kind of works its way into the kind of, top 3 to 5 amp sim pedals right up there with the Universal Audio stuff, the Iridium, ACS1. It'll be interesting to see if it's the name that's preventing it from getting there. And I see it's up on the screen here. It's the Friedman IRX, and it's got 2 channels. It's got a boost. It's got the XLR out, all that stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how that does in the marketplace. Actually, no XLR out, but balanced out through TRS. So, and it's got the effects loop, which is cool, and the headphone. So he kind of figured that out, that you can have all of your effects in there, but also be able to hear them through the headphones. So, and that's at $499. So it is more expensive. It's $100 more than an ACS1.
Yeah.
But interesting concept. I guess we'll see how it does.
Yeah. I think like looking through the list, like we already talked about, the list, it's a great list. It's a good starting point because there's
it's the best list we've seen of any of these, I would say. For any subject we've covered so far that relates to these.
Yeah, and there's a few on there I've never used. I've never used that orange little tiny terror or whatever they call it. Like I've never used Terror Stamp. Is it because it's small, so it's like micro? Like the list of it is cool. I think when it kind of the sum up this week's episode, is when looking for like these amp cab pedals, like don't go for all the glitzy, crazy, all these extra features, because most of the time, like, that's not going to be the one pedal that you're going to be stepping on a lot or really adjusting, because that's like having your amp behind you. Like, you're not constantly turning around to do this, to engage this, to add this or whatever. Like, you're setting your amp and leaving it. So treat it like an amp, because that's what it is. And then let your board or your rig or anything. I think the dream, if I can remember the list well, because I backed out of it. Like, looking over like some of those pedals that they have, even the TC Electronic one. I'm not familiar with that pedal, the Black Star. I'm not very familiar with those, but like between the prices, they're all between $199, except when you get to the QC, because it's $16.99. They're all within the 2 to 500 or 2 to 700 range, and you can get some really good, like, great tones out of it. Some, depends on if you're running a flex loops or anything. So yeah, no, I think it's a great list. What are your thoughts, Grant, on this?
I think the only thing there's a couple things we haven't covered. I'm surprised we haven't brought up the simplifier yet, and I'm happy to leave it. But my only point with the simplifier was that if you're looking at specs again on paper, does it have a tube? Is it DSP? Is it all analog? Simplifier is all analog. But I personally do not connect with that pedal at all. I find it very hard to use and get a sound I really like. But again, I have plenty of customers that love it, and they've, again, tried them all, and the simplifier is their choice. And so again, I think whether it has a tube or not, I think that's, it's up to you if that's important, but I would still prefer to try it and make up my mind that way. As far as the list, the other thing we haven't touched on yet, which I think is these days a valid thing you need to now consider, is Mason briefly talked about this with the Quad Cortex, is the ability to capture amps or not. So a lot of these you can buy third-party IRs that someone else has created, which is essentially capturing the room and mic'd up cab and stuff. But the ability to capture your amp easily and capture your pedals that you may have and not want to take on tour or take out of your studio, whatever it is, that is now a consideration you need to make. And on our list, correct me if I'm wrong, the only ones that can do that is the Quad Cortex and the Tonex pedal on the current list that we've talked about today. And so I think Tonex does a great job of that. The Quad Cortex does a good job of that, and they make it quite easy to do. So I think that's the only other thing as well you really need to see is that important to me if I'm going into this realm of being able to capture existing gear I already own.
And another thing to mention too, with capturing gear you already own, you can't just plug in your amp head like directly into, like, say, the Quad or something. Like, you have to have what was the box that you guys used, Mason, when you captured
you have to have some sort of load, but we use the SUR reactive load for ours.
Exactly. So like you have to, like, in thinking about these things, especially when you spend $16.99 on a unit or however much the Tonex was, the Tonex is
$400, I think, but you need to buy a capture box as well, which I think is another couple $100.
Yeah. So like, there's things you have to you have to think, like, long term, like, oh yeah, if I'm going to do that, I should buy these boxes. But sometimes, and I have learned from experience, capturing some of these types of things and putting on your amp, sometimes they do sound the same, sometimes they don't. I haven't captured with the Quad yet, but Mason, you did, and that yours sounded identical, which was really cool. But I've had people like, man, I've done the capture and it just didn't work out. And you find that some of the gear that you have just isn't, like, working, or you don't have the knowledge, so you just kind of rush. But yeah, no, I mean, is there anything you guys would say that's missing from the list, or anything that they've maybe forgotten about? I feel like they hit pretty well on these.
Yeah, I think that they stuck with the most popular ones. Again, I mean, I mentioned the Friedman one. I don't know that it was out probably when this list came out. I think, it might have been too new for them to be able to include anyway at that point.
For sure.
But I do think that will be an interesting one to keep an eye on. As things develop, like, will it advance beyond what the Revolt has done, or will we really just see sort of a dominating force of the Quad Cortex, the Tone X, the Universal Audio stuff. I expect that there's going to be something new from Strymon in the near future that's around this sort of theme. So it'll be interesting. I mean, there's a lot of choices. That's the good thing for us guitar players.
Yeah, I think the only one that really is missing, and maybe it's just because a lot of people haven't looked at it, and maybe it's just me. I actually kind of enjoyed this one, was the Boss IR200, which like surprisingly enough, like it's not, it's not the hot kid, the most popular kid on the block or in the school kind of thing, but like for like what it does, it's a really cool pedal, and I think sometimes it can get overlooked, but it's really compact too. It doesn't have all those crazy XL out features or anything. But yeah, so I think this was a great kind of conversation, especially if you're looking into getting an amp cab sim, if you're looking for reliability or have a backup system. Is there any final thoughts, any recommendations or words of wisdom you guys would like to bestoweth upon, let's coin that word, bestoweth, on our listeners today before we jump back in the Miata on the way to Tone Town?
I think we've covered a lot of it. I think thinking through your signal chain is important. If you need stereo or mono, some of these are mono in, stereo out as an example. Like just thinking through some of the real practicalities of where this could end up on your rig is smart. But other than that, I think if you tried it out and you really like how it sounds, then I think you're well on your way. And I think that covers a lot of what we've chatted about today. So I honestly don't have too much more to add to what we've already said. I think the list is good. I think there's a lot to consider, and this is getting into overdrive territory with these amp and cab sims. There's so much choice that it really is hard to keep up. And so don't expect to try everything, but I would say if you pick a few off this list, you'll be starting out very well to consider.
Yeah.
I think it's again the best list that we've come across that kind of ranks a top 10 in really any category, whether it's overdrive, distortion. Some of these again are really disconnected, I think, from the marketplace. It seems to pretty much have hit right where it is, and it'll be interesting to see how these continue to develop and kind of what's coming next. And I think all that we needed to say was in the podcast, and just one more reiteration of what Brian stated in the opening of the podcast. If you're enjoying these conversations, we would really appreciate an honest review on iTunes. iTunes is typically the place where all the other podcasts seem to index their rankings based on. We're still number one in Bangladesh. We want to continue to maintain our number one position in Bangladesh, and I believe that's because Grant's using a VPN from there, so it all takes is one listen to push us over the edge.
I don't miss an episode.
Yes.
Yep. So just a heads up to do that over on Apple if you can. We would really appreciate it. And of course, supporting our sponsors in turn supports us. So if there's anything there that you're interested in, please do support them. And until next time, we will see you a little further on the road to Tone Town.
All right.
See you guys.
See ya.